The American people are angry about rising costs, and they are right to be angry, especially in the grocery aisle. It is infuriating to go to the store week after week and see that a pound of chicken breasts that cost $5 last week was marked up to $6 this week, or that loaf of bread that was $2.99 last week now costs $3.50. It is even more frustrating to open up a box of cereal and think, I could have sworn there were a whole lot more Cheerios and a lot less air in this box the last time I opened one up. Or to notice that a package of spaghetti that used to feed 4 or 5 people now appears only to be enough to feed 3. High grocery prices and shrinkflation hurt seniors on fixed income, hurt college students struggling to get by, hurt working families all across this country, and that is why we are holding this hearing today. Grocery prices skyrocketed during the pandemic, and in many cases they have kept going up, even though the pandemic is over. Supply chains have been restored, food manufacturers' costs are going down. The millions of Americans who produce, package, and sell our food are now back at work. Food inflation has slowed over the past year, but not nearly fast enough. In too many places, including in Boston, grocery prices continue to strain family budgets. So what exactly is going on? Why did grocery prices go up so much, and why have they stayed so high? The answer is pretty obvious when you dig in on the numbers. Grocery prices are up because of good old-fashioned corporate price gouging. And they can gouge consumers on prices because there is only a small number of companies controlling every level of the food chain. In plain English, giant grocery stores and massive food conglomerates are ripping people off. And they can get away with it because there's not enough competition to keep them in check. 4 big companies, Walmart, Costco, Kroger, and Hold, the corporate behemoths behind Hannaford, Giant, Food Lion, and Stop & Shop, control over 70% of the grocery market in most major cities. Food producers are even more consolidated. A couple of big cereal manufacturers, Kellogg's and General Mills, control nearly 60% of the market. A single company, Cal-Maine, controls about 20% of the egg market. 4 corporations control 85% of the beef industry and 75% of the pork industry. Everything you see as you stroll down the grocery aisle, lettuce in aisle 1, beer in aisle 5, pretzels and potato chips in aisle 9, ice cream in the frozen food aisle, is dominated by a handful of big food producers. Now, the pandemic gave these big food conglomerates an excuse to jack up prices on grocery staples beyond what was necessary to cover increases in their costs from inflation or from supply chain disruptions. And now we're past the market shock of the pandemic. Corporations' costs are coming down and their profits are rising. But because of the lack of competition, companies are keeping their prices high. Meanwhile, conglomerates hit small farmers by charging sky-high prices for fertilizer and seed, and by locking farmers into unfair contracts that limit their ability to make a living off their own farms. As a result, Big Food is doing great. Kraft Heinz, which sells everything from Oreos to pasta sauce to coffee, increased its profits by 44%. Oh, I read it wrong. Increased its profits by 448%. It really is a staggering number in 2022. Cal-Maine, the largest egg producer in the United States, increased its profits by 718%. These are profit increases. And it's not simply supply and demand that's pushing up corporations' eye-popping profits. It's greedflation. Those big corporate profits accounted for more than half of the increase in food prices between 2020 and 2021. And that creates problems for families at the grocery store, and then it reverberates throughout our nation. For most of 2023, corporate profiteering accounted for more than half of all inflation economy-wide. Facts are clear. Massive corporate profits are a big reason why grocery prices have gone up and stayed up. But policymakers don't have to stand by and watch. We can actually do something about it. We can rein in these massive food companies and grocery stores and protect competition in order to lower prices. And new polling from Data for Progress shows that nearly 70% of Americans, both Republicans and Democrats, support the U.S. government doing more to regulate grocery stores and corporate food producers that raise prices to pad their profits. The Biden administration recognized early on and has taken major steps to fight big food greedflation and to help American families. Congress can help the administration do even more. I appreciate our witnesses joining us here today to talk about how we can do that. I will now hand it over to Ranking Member Kennedy to deliver his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the last 3 years, the American people have been ravaged by inflation. That inflation, like all inflation, is man-made. That man's name is Joe Biden. Since President Biden has been president, the average electricity bill in America, the average, has gone up 27%. Louisiana gasoline, I know every state is different, but Louisiana gasoline under President Biden is up 59%. Eggs are up 79%. Bread, 30%. Coffee, 30%. Milk, 15% under President Biden. Ice cream, 26%. Housing in general is up 19% because of President Biden's inflation. Clothing, 12%. Used cars and trucks, 20%. New cars, 19%. Mortgage rates are up a staggering 160%. If you add it all up under President Biden, inflation the last 3 years has been 20% in Louisiana and 19.2% nationwide. Louisiana is not a wealthy state. The median household income in my state for a family of four is between $55,000 and $60,000 a year. Mom, dad, 2 children. That's not a lot of money when you think about it. A working family, mom and dad both work. They both have to drive to work, so they have car payments. They have a house note. They have to buy food. Sometimes they have to pay tuition for their children. As a result of President Biden's inflation, the average family in Louisiana is paying today an extra $900 a month. That's almost $11,000 a year. Now, I know that each of you makes more than $55,000 or $60,000 a year, but imagine that for a moment that you make $60,000 a year, and you're the provider for your family. And all of a sudden, you've got to find an extra $11,000 a year. Wow. You know, you max out your credit cards, you go through your savings, you've spent all your STEMI checks long ago. Inflation is gutting the American people like a fish. It has become a cancer on the American dream. And quite frankly, that's why President Biden is polling right up there with hemorrhoids. I mean, the American people can't sit down and explain to you the difference between disinflation and deflation. The American people, they don't read Aristotle every day. They just get up every day and go to work and obey the law and pay their taxes and try to do the right thing by their children and maybe save a little money for retirement. But they're really being hurt. Now, why? Because President Biden has spent money like it was pond water. It started with the American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. He has spent trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, money that we had to borrow. Now, unless you were playing Frisbee in the quad during Econ 101, you know, whether you're Milton Friedman or John Maynard Keynes, that when you spend this kind of money, you're going to have inflation. Dr. Jason Furman, who was a chief economic advisor to President Obama, tried to tell President Biden. He said, if you do this, you're going to have inflation. Former Harvard President Larry Summers said the same thing. You don't have to be Euclid to figure this out. We're all entitled to our opinion. That's the beauty of America. You know, you're not free if you can't say what you think, and you're not free if you can't express yourself. I do not believe that there is some nationwide conspiracy between and among small business people, medium-sized business people, large business people who have conspired to raise these prices. I don't think most of these businesses wanted to have to raise their prices. They did have to, though, because their costs have gone up dramatically. And you don't have to look any further for the reason than 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I think the evidence bears that out. I don't blame President Biden. I don't blame him for trying to get reelected. I don't, okay? When I run again, I'm going to try to get reelected. I don't blame him for trying to blame inflation on somebody else. I get that. But the truth of the matter is he's blamed inflation on everything but murder hornets. And we've still got time left. He may blame them on murder hornets. But the truth of the matter, it's his own economic policies. And his own economists tried to tell him this, and he wouldn't listen. And the American people are paying the consequences. They're going to have a say, though, this November. And everyone should vote your conscience. If dead people can vote, you can too. Vote for the candidate of your choice. But I can tell you this, the only place you're going to find lower prices is in the voting booth. It's not going to change. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. So now let's introduce our witnesses. First, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Lindsay Owens. Dr. Owens is the Executive Director of Groundwork Collaborative, a research organization focused on ensuring the economy works for all of us. She's advised multiple members of Congress, including me, on economic policy. Thank you, Dr. Owens. Next, Dr. E.J. Antony. Dr. Antony is a research fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget. His research focuses on fiscal and monetary policy. Thank you for being here, Dr. Anthony. Dr. Norbert J. Michel. Dr. Michel is Vice President and Director of the Cato Institute's Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives, where he specializes in issues pertaining to financial markets and monetary policy. Dr. Michel was most recently Director for Data Analysis at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you, Dr. Michel, for being with us. Joe Maxwell is the co-founder and chief strategy officer of Farm Action. He previously served as Missouri's lieutenant governor and is a Missouri family farmer. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Maxwell. And finally, we have one of those small business owners that you were talking about, Senator Kennedy, Mr. Alap, am I saying it right? Alap. Mr. Alap Vora is the owner of Concord Market, an independent grocery store in Brooklyn, New York. Mr. Vora opened Concord Market after graduating from George Washington University. His family has been opening and operating small businesses in New York City for nearly 50 years. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Vora. So thank you to all of our witnesses. I'm going to start out by turning to Dr. Owens for her opening statement. Dr. Owens, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chair Warren, Ranking Member Kennedy, members of the committee, thanks for inviting me to testify today. My name is Lindsay. I'm the Executive Director of the Groundwork Collaborative, a Washington, D.C.-based economic policy think tank. By a large margin, when Americans are asked which factors they look at to decide how the national economy is doing, they pick grocery prices. They do this for 2 reasons. First, nearly everyone buys groceries. Second, grocery prices are top of mind because they're particularly high right now. While prices overall have risen 19% in the last 3 years, grocery prices are up 25%. Factors like climate change, international conflict, and disease in plant and animals have all contributed to food price increases. But grocery industry consolidation and the profiteering and price gouging it allows is another key driver. The grocery sector is very concentrated. Just 4 grocery retailers account for over 1/3 of national grocery sales, and Walmart, America's largest grocer, now single-handedly captures nearly 1/4 of all grocery dollars. This consolidation grants the remaining corporate giants the freedom to hike prices without fear of being undercut by the competition. In areas with fewer grocery stores, like rural areas and low-income ones, grocery price inflation runs above grocery inflation in places with more competition. Grocers and suppliers are also using new technologies to facilitate price hikes. Innovations in cloud computing, AI, and surveillance targeting have enabled companies to collect reams of data on their competitors and their customers. They can use this data to collude on prices, as we've seen with the meatpacking data company AgriStats. And as I lay out in my written testimony, my organization's review of public marketing materials by a new cottage industry of pricing data service providers shows that they are boasting about their ability to use data to help their clients hike prices higher, faster, and for longer. Those are quotes. Industry consolidation and technological advances have come together in the shadow of the pandemic, where inflation gave companies the cover they needed to execute their most mercenary and egregious pricing strategies. A recent report by the Federal Trade Commission found that some firms seem to have used rising costs as an opportunity to further hike prices to increase their profits, and that prices and profits remain elevated even as supply chain pressures have eased. These moves have contributed, according to the CEA, to a 20-year high in grocery profit margins. Because of these shifts in the food and grocery sector, what used to be a fairly uneventful weekly trip to the grocery is now rife with tricks, traps, and outright landmines. A few recent examples. Walmart, America's largest grocer, recently settled a class action lawsuit alleging they have rigged the produce scales, inflating product weights for pork, seafood, and citrus. Food giant ConAgra has been caught swapping out oil for water in its popular wishbone Italian salad dressing, a practice known as skimpflation. Companies like grocery giant Albertsons are using AI and surveillance targeting to maximize price hikes and track closely their competitors' prices. Digital price tags are now becoming commonplace on the shelves at stores like Kroger, allowing grocers to raise prices more frequently and paving the way for the implementation of surge pricing in the future. Online grocers, more people are shopping online for their groceries, are using dark patterns and vast troves of data, including your own personal browsing and purchasing history, to determine the maximum price you are willing to pay for an item, a practice known as personalized pricing. So what can be done? The Biden-Harris administration has taken a number of steps, including challenging the Kroger-Albertsons merger and suing AgriStats. They've also helped families afford rising food costs by expanding nutrition assistance. But Congress has a role to play as well and should take up new legislation from Senator Casey to ban shrinkflation and broad-based anti-price gouging legislation like Senator Warren's Price Gouging Prevention Act of 2024 to ensure that firms are not profiting off of crises with excessive price hikes. The legislation can also stop price gouging further upstream, like collusion in the energy sector, which filters into higher food prices. High food costs are taking a toll on Americans, particularly low-income families. Food is a necessity, not a luxury, and when grocery profiteering and price gouging are spiking food prices, Congress must act. American families can't afford to wait and see if the chair of the Federal Reserve manages to bring down prices. Dinner needs to be on the table tonight. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Owens. Dr. Antony.
Chair Warren, Ranking Member Kennedy, member of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to discuss with you today the cause of food price inflation and its impact on American families, particularly those in low-income households. I'm a public finance economist and the Richard F. Astor Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, where I research fiscal and monetary policy with a particular focus on the Federal Reserve. I'm also a senior fellow at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. Since January 2021, prices have risen across the American economy a cumulative 19.3%, and food prices on average have risen 20.4%. These price increases have outpaced wage growth, with the average American worker's weekly paycheck growing just 14.1% during this time, but falling 4.4% in inflation-adjusted terms. Despite that paycheck being about $150 larger, it buys about $50 less than it did in January 2021. That reduced purchasing power hits lower-income families hardest, in part because inflation changes consumer spending habits. As people switch to relatively inexpensive food to save money amidst ever-rising prices, demand increases for those foodstuffs, which were disproportionately purchased by lower-income families. That increased demand further drives up prices on top of the increase from inflation. Unprecedentedly large federal deficits over the last 4 years, financed by the Federal Reserve's purchase of Treasury securities, increased the money supply by trillions of dollars, much faster than the increase in the real economy. That transferred wealth from the people to the government and devalued the dollar at rates not seen in over 40 years. Consequently, it now takes more dollars to purchase the same products and services. This phenomenon is perhaps best explained if we remember that one of the functions of money is to serve as a measuring tool. If a yardstick were to shrink to just 30 inches, it would take 120 yards to cover the distance between end zones on a football field, where it previously only took 100 yards. The field is not larger, the yardstick is smaller. This is precisely what we have observed over the last several years with inflation. Products and services are not worth more. The dollar is worth less. That fact is just as true for food as it is for everything else. Nevertheless, people, particularly in the public sector, continue to create scapegoats for inflation, blaming anyone and anything except profligate government spending. Businesses are a prime target in this regard, with claims of corporate greed and so-called price gouging being rife in the current political environment. However, these claims are negated by empirical evidence. First, the idea that food price inflation is caused by corporate greed does not even pass the smell test. No one can explain why, beginning in January 2021, corporations suddenly became greedier than at any point in the prior 40 years. But putting aside the faulty logic of such claims, the data simply do not support the assertion that corporate greed causes inflation. According to the Biden administration's own figures, prices paid by businesses and consumers alike have risen about 19% since January 2021. In fact, for nearly all that time, cumulative inflation for businesses was larger than cumulative inflation paid by consumers. In other words, businesses were effectively shielding consumers from cost increases. It has only been within the last several months that the total increase in consumer prices has caught up to the total increase paid by businesses. A close examination of corporate profits further dismantles the narrative that inflation is the result of corporate greed or so-called price gouging. In the last 3 years, corporate profits within the food industry have increased 13.9% on average, but are down 4.2% after adjusting for inflation. Therefore, corporate profits have only increased in the same sense that the average American's weekly paycheck has increased, which is to say in strictly nominal terms. What that paycheck can buy and what those corporate profits can buy has decreased since the beginning of 2021. The source of inflation is not businesses seeking higher profits or consumers seeking higher wages, things which are constant in the economy. Rather, the inflation which American families have suffered under for the last several years is the result of runaway federal deficit spending, measured in the trillions of dollars and financed by the Federal Reserve's expansion of the money supply. Americans today are paying for those trillions of dollars in government spending, not only through explicit taxes like federal income tax, but also through the hidden tax of inflation, including higher prices for food. Thank you kindly for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. Dr. Michelle.
Good afternoon, Chair Warren, Ranking Member Kennedy, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Norbert Michel. I'm Vice President and Director for the Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives at the Cato Institute. The views that I express in this testimony, however, are my own and should not be construed as representing any official position of the Cato Institute. In my testimony today, I argue that Congress should not have been surprised by abnormally high inflation in the wake of the COVID relief spending, and members should not waste their time searching for novel explanations of what happened. For most of the 20th century and all of the 21st, modern fiscal policy has been predicated on stimulating aggregate demand with deficit-financed government spending. And the idea has always been that this spending would put upward pressure on both prices and profits, thereby causing businesses to supply more goods and services to meet the increased demand, thereby reversing a slowdown. And it's always been understood that too much spending and/or severely constrained resources would result in inflation. And I think nobody seriously thought, on the economist side, that inflation would be painless or easy to precisely control. And I want to make 3 additional points. First, the abnormal levels of inflation experienced in the wake of the COVID pandemic and the shutdowns were primarily caused by excessive fiscal policy accommodated by the Fed. With just one bill, Congress injected roughly 3 times more than the estimated amount needed to fill the economy's demand shortfall. In just the first quarter of 2021, per capita disposable personal income increased 13%, an artificial boost that was 10 times greater than average. And this injection occurred while many different segments of the economy still faced major supply constraints from COVID and the shutdowns. So it should surprise no one that inflation soon followed. People were given unusually large amounts of money to spend in markets that were still struggling to supply goods and services. My second point is that the month-to-month levels of inflation that the U.S. has experienced since June of 2022 have been well within the normal range for the entire post-World War II era. Between 1973 and 2019, the average monthly change for the CPI is 0.32%, and the change for food prices is virtually the same. Annualized, those rates are about 4%. But as we know, following the COVID pandemic and the shutdowns, the U.S. experienced an unusually large spike in inflation. What most people forget, though, is that this increase came after a short bout of falling prices. The CPI actually declined in March, April, and May of 2020. Only then did inflation take off. And then from June of 2020 through June of 2022, the monthly change in the CPI was 0.57%, with nearly the same average change for food prices. These are annualized rates of more than 6%, rates not seen in the US since the 1970s. And because that spike was so high, even if inflation had quickly flattened out to rates of increase near zero for a full year, the annual rates of change would have remained above average for at least 1 year. And in fact, that's what happened. Those rates did stay elevated. But between July of 2022 and April of 24, the average month-to-month change for the overall CPI is just 0.27%, and that's below average for the post-World War II era. When considering the typical variation in the CPI, these rates are even well within the normal rates of change for the low inflation period that started in the U.S. in 1983. And if we look at only the most recent changes in food prices, we again see a normal trend. The most recent CPI release shows a change in food prices of 0 for April of 2024. For the preceding 6 months, the rates were all within the typical range of food price increases during the entire post-World War II period, and again, considering the typical volatility, within the range seen for the entire post-1983 period. Finally, causal explanations for inflation such as corporate greed, profiteering, price gouging, greedflation, and industry consolidation do not hold up for multiple reasons, with one of the most obvious problems being timing. We must believe, for example, that virtually all companies colluded and decided not to be greedy for decades, then to be altruistic for several months, then to be very greedy for nearly 2 years, and then for the most recent 2 years to revert to being not so greedy. And that's why these explanations quickly fall apart for inflation. Thank you for your consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Michelle. Mr. Maxwell.
512,000, a number I will always remember. The number of those of us who were raising hogs in America when I began farming. Today, there's less than 61,000. I have lived the negative impact that government policies have had on competition. Chair Warren, Ranking Member Kennedy, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to present my testimony on this critical issue consumers, farmers, and ranchers are facing. My testimony and submitted statement provide clear evidence of why government must take action against the monopolistic corporations to combat corporate price gouging. By taking action, retail grocery prices will be fair for America's consumers, and farmers will thrive. Today, 4 corporations control 85% of beef processing, at least 67% pork processing, 60% poultry, 75% of the nitrogen fertilizer. 2 companies supply all of the potash for North America. 2 seed companies account for 72% of corn and 66% of soybeans. In my submitted written statement, I referenced 3 cases, studies conducted by Farm Action demonstrating how dominant firms exercise opportunistic behavior to price gouge. In 2022, egg prices soared over 300%, pushing corporate profits up tenfold. For one corporation, it went from 50 million gross margin to 500 million. The industry excused away price gouging, blaming the avian flu and higher prices, yet egg production dropped less than 7% and costs were up only 19%. When no competitor increased production to curb the leading producer's excessive pricing, USDA noted the market had not responded as expected. A fire in Kansas beef plant idled 6% of processing capacity. Using the fire as an excuse, the dominant firms were able to push down the price they paid farmers and ranchers and raise the price they charged groceries. The result was the largest recorded spread between what farmers were paid and what consumers had to pay. The beef industry had exercised opportunistic market behavior to extract excessive profits while killing 5,000 more head of cattle during the 3 weeks following the fire than the 3 weeks prior to the fire. In the fall of 2021, fertilizer prices went up as much as 210%, excessively pushing company profits up. CF Industries reported a 530% margin increase while only reporting a 120% cost increase. Nutrien reported as high as 680% margin increase and only a 51% increase in cost. Potash production capacity actually exceeded demand at the time, and one nitrogen-producing company had curtailed production in 2020 because of excess supply. What was the basis for price gouging? Fertilizer companies base 50% of their pricing on how much farmers are paid for their commodities. Commodity prices had risen. They hyped the cost and shortage excuse to justify price gouging farmers out of their profits. In 2021, President Biden issued an executive order on promoting competition in the American economy, pushing back against 40 years of presidential precedents of letting corporations have their way in the market. DOJ and FTC have aggressively tackled consolidation with new acquisition and merger guidelines and legal actions. DOJ made history by invoking the Packers and Stockyards Act provisions to put an end to the payment scheme called the tournament system and 15% of the poultry market. USDA has made investments in local and regional processing to stimulate competition. Much is left to be done. Without directing government procurement to secure USDA's investments in the markets, these investments will fail. Antitrust law enforcement is critical to putting a check on price gouging. The Chair's legislation, Senate Bill 3803, the Price Gouging Prevention Act, provides FTC with the tools they need to address price gouging and opportunistic behavior. Most importantly, USDA must issue and finalize rules that provide individual farmers and ranchers with the right to be protected by the Packers and Stockyards Act for an individual harm on their individual operation. Dominant food and agriculture firms are exhibiting opportunistic behavior that result in price gouging. We call on the government to free itself from the undue influence of corporate special interest and own its role as safeguarding the market accountability and competitiveness in the food and agriculture markets. Taking bold actions against monopolistic corporations will free the markets, giving consumers fair prices and farmers opportunity to thrive. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here.
And thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Appreciate it. Mr. Vora.
Chair Warren, Ranking Member Kennedy, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak about the impact of anti-competitive behavior impacting America's grocery prices and food prices. My name is Alab Vora. My family owns Concord Market in Brooklyn, New York. Concord Market has been a family-owned neighborhood grocer since 2009, and in the 15 years of business, we've faced snowstorms, blackouts, protests, global pandemics, and have found a way to stay open every single day for our community. Our late father, Ashok Victor Vora, who started our family business over 50 years ago, taught us the importance of being job creators and how to be an integral part of the communities that we serve. A personal approach that bigger box stores simply don't take. Today, I will discuss how consolidation, unexpected price hikes, and practices like shrinkflation continue to place disproportionate impacts on small business owners like us. In recent years, we've seen prices increase on or vary 20 to 30% on everyday products on our shelves. Milk, eggs, soda, snack items, and there isn't much that we can do about it because of our limited purchasing powers as a small business. We suspect these fluctuations are a result of our distributors taking advantage of the slightest market changes to upcharge us and our peers. Despite the fact supply chain challenges have mostly eased since the darkest days of COVID, companies have passed on price increases to grocers like us, still have not eased prices. Customers and employees of Concord Market have witnessed shrinkflation firsthand, watching canned goods and other shelf-stable items fluctuate in size and substance while driving business away for us. Some distributors claim that they had to increase prices due to supply challenges, but when shortages are resolved, the distributors keep charging the same high prices or even more. While small business struggle to make payroll, major companies boasted record profits in 2023. In fiscal year 2023, U.S. Foods reported a 19% growth in adjusted earnings, while case volume growth only increased by 7.3% for independent businesses. Similarly, food giant Cisco raked in 33% more in the fourth quarter of 2023, while only increasing the food service volume by 2.3%. The cost of doing business under these circumstances is excruciating in cities that are struggling, especially like New York City, where we've already been dealing with other cost considerations like third-party delivery fees, utility costs, waste removal fees increasing, credit card processing fees constantly going up, congestion pricing, which is starting next month, and more. These factors make it nearly impossible for us to try to compete as a small business. As a pillar in our community, we attempt to offset price increases by offering various benefits to our customers through rewards programs, student discounts. We waive delivery fees for the elderly in our community. These types of transactions are not profitable necessarily for a business, but it's the right thing to do. We fear that if things continue as they are without intervention from leaders like you, small businesses like us will be unable to continue to serve the customers we care about the most, our neighbors. While we bear responsibility for the factors in our immediate control, we need support from lawmakers to navigate highly consolidated markets and promote competition for the smallest businesses. Congress must act alongside federal enforcement agencies to ensure that the major players in our economy are held accountable for their actions that result in rising prices, that put a squeeze on small businesses and our customers. Congress can do this in multiple ways, but I'd highlight 3 starting points. First, pass the Shrinkflation Prevention Act of 2024 to direct the FTC to create and enact regulations to establish shrinkflation as an unfair and deceptive action. Second, provide necessary funding to the FTC to enforce the Robinson-Patman Act of 1938, which protects small businesses from being driven out of the marketplace via discriminatory pricing practices. Lastly, continue to work with local businesses like us and organizations like the Small Business Majority to shed light on the discriminatory practices that prevent small businesses from being able to provide competitive, affordable prices for the families and businesses that we serve. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vora. Appreciate your testimony. Appreciate the testimony from all of you today. So I'm going to start the questions. Look, there are a lot of things that can affect the price of groceries. Weather, war, energy costs. But let's start with the argument that's right here in front of us. We have at least 2 witnesses who are saying it's just plain old inflation. And the reason that grocery prices are up is because inflation is up across the board. Dr. Owens, is that what the data tell you?
Yeah, there are absolutely a lot of different causes of the inflation we see right now, but one of them is absolutely industry consolidation. Look, when grocers gobble up the competition, the remaining larger giants can raise prices more aggressively. They just can, because they don't have to worry about being undercut by the competition. And the research really shows this over and over again. Grocery inflation in rural areas where shoppers have fewer choices is running 2% ahead of grocery inflation elsewhere. Lower income neighborhoods where grocery stores are more reluctant to locate, you see higher prices there too. And you also see that grocery mergers in less competitive areas result in higher price increases than grocery mergers in more competitive areas. So over and over again, consolidation really is at the root of the food price inflation we're seeing today.
Okay, so what you're really saying is you actually can test this. You can disaggregate the data, and you can look where there's more competition, and when there's more competition, what you find out, what happened to prices?
Lower prices.
Lower prices. And when there's less competition, that is when there's more concentration, I take it what you're getting is higher prices.
Absolutely.
At that point. So let's keep talking about the pieces here. Concentration didn't just happen in one day. Yeah. And yet what we see is we really do see, I think it was Dr. Anthony, who said, you see prices kind of going along, and then you see them flatten out for a little bit, and then you see a real spike. How does concentration fit in with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this kind of old saw developing that companies didn't just get greedy overnight. And look, nobody thinks that corporations weren't out to make a buck in 2020. Of course they were. And they're out to make a buck in 2021 and 2022 and 2023 and in 2024. Corporations have been getting bigger too. Consolidation is not new. But you really need means, motive, and opportunity to commit the perfect crime, right? The profit motive is constant. The means are that market power, that pricing power that you get from consolidation. But what changed is the opportunity to use inflation as cover to go bigger on price hikes. And that's really what we're seeing in this period.
So, it's interesting you would raise that, because one of the things I had pulled out here is how the CEOs of some of these giant grocery companies are making exactly this point. They don't make it in their commercials, of course, but they make it when they do earnings calls. So that, for example, General Mills owns more than 100 brands of grocery store staples: Cheerios, Betty Crocker cake mixes, Progresso canned soups. When a General Mills executive got on the phone with his investors, he bragged about their price increases, and he makes the point that their profits went up not because they simply passed along costs because of inflation or because demand was up. Nope. He said it out loud. Profits are up because General Mills was getting smart about how they look at pricing, how they could figure out to boost their price, in their case, their profit margin up to 16.5%, something they hadn't seen before. Executives at Hershey's made the same kind of point on an earnings call. In effect, inflation has been very, very good to these CEOs because it's provided them, I take it, a form of protective coloration here, and they can go ahead and raise prices during this time. Now, some commentators have said, no, we should welcome concentration because concentration will permit these grocery chains, for example, to exert downward pressure on prices because they can negotiate for better deals. Is that what the data show us, Dr. Owens?
Yeah, I mean, I think the argument that sort of apologists for monopolies will make is that if you get an economy of scale, you can really drive down the cost per unit. But the problem we're trying to address today isn't that the cost per unit is down. It's that the cost they're charging consumers is up, right? And that is a function of a market with no competition that can't check the excessive markups that we're seeing in the food sector.
Okay, and let's just take this over to Big Ag, if we can, for a minute, Mr. Maxwell. What about Big Ag? You talked about the concentration, and the numbers you cited were truly breathtaking. But what's happened to pricing with Big Ag?
Well, the same thing that has just been testified about is happening in Big Ag. Big Ag is, not long ago, as we know, the big 6 input suppliers became the big 3. I mean, we don't even talk about concentration ratio of 4. There's 3. With that kind of market power and that kind of tacit collusion, if there's only 3 of you, you can figure out pricing structure.
Yeah.
Then what happens is they put in place structures and take opportunity whenever there's supply increases or there's a supply disruption. They quickly seize that moment with opportunistic behavior to run up prices. We see the mainstream press says, oh, there's a supply hiccup somewhere. Everybody starts talking about it. The next thing you know, we farmers, we're going to pay a lot more money when we go get our supplies. Yeah. So they do the same thing. They're very opportunistic. There's too few of them to have true competition. The market dynamics no longer work. They don't work because one of the dynamics is competition. Yeah. When there's no competition, you don't have the, as USDA said in the egg case, the market didn't respond as we expected. No, it's not going to respond as you expected unless you consider the corporate concentration level within that market and the power that brings to gouge farmers or consumers.
So really powerful point, Mr. Maxwell. You know, what we're really talking about is embracing markets, wanting to see the power of markets, but to get those markets to function, you've got to actually have competition. And when you have enormous concentration, you don't have that competition. And I think what you're telling us is what we're seeing in food pricing right now is not just at the grocery store level, it's all the way up and down the chain. That it starts with seed and fertilizer, makes it all the way through the process, and that is what is pushing up prices in this very concentrated industry. Thank you. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Interesting questions. Mr. Maxwell, you're a farmer, is that right?
Yes, Senator.
Excuse me. You used to be a farmer, or you still are?
Yes, Senator, I grew up on a farm. I'm 4th-generation Missouri farmer. Mm-hmm. My brother does most of the farming. I do this activity more. I do have degrees in ag economics and a law degree, but I still actively farm. I've got over 100 ewes on the farm. We have hogs production. We're kind of the diversified, traditional family farm type operation, lease out some of the land to the neighbor boy.
Yeah, well, America was born on a farm, so thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Senator.
Dr. Owens, you talked about in order to commit a crime, you have to have means, motive, and opportunity. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you have suggested that it's not an optimal situation to have Well, strike that. Let me just get after it here. What crime are you accusing the 4 major food companies of?
Price gouging, sir.
Okay. You think they're price fixing?
In some cases, absolutely.
Okay. Name the 4 companies that you are accusing of price fixing.
In the grocery sector or more broadly?
The 4 you've been talking
I
about.
mean, so I think.
Name me every company that you think is price fixing in violation of the antitrust laws.
Yeah, I mean, so the most recent example that I think is worth considering is Agristat.
Yes,
the
ma'am,
big-
but if you don't mind, we'll come back and do the examples. Name me the companies that you're accusing of price fixing.
Well, the first one is Agristats, which the Department of Justice has sued for price fixing.
Who else?
In the grocery sector, we've got Walmart, we've got Kroger.
Walmart is price fixing.
No, I haven't accused them of price fixing. What
You just did.
No, what I've said is that they're able
No, you
to
just
expand
All
their
right, let me
markup.
start over here. I want you price fixing is a serious crime, Doc. You can go to jail for that. And I want to be sure I understand your testimony. Who are you accusing of price fixing?
Yeah, look, what my testimony clearly states
No,
is that
tell me which companies you're accusing of price fixing. You said some were price fixing, and I want to know which ones.
yeah, I mean, look,
I may report them myself.
the company that's absolutely under investigation by the DOJ
Which
is
ones are
Agristat.
price fixing?
I think the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice should take a close look at the 4 major grocers. They should take a close look
But
at
tell
the
me,
4 major
can
meat
you-
packers.
if
There
you
are
just
currently
answer my question,
there's
which
pending
companies-
litigation.
Which companies are price fixing?
Tyson is a great example. Tyson, the large meat packer.
Okay, who
the
else?
The
Who
big
else?
4 meat packers are all
Who else? That's
currently
one.
under.
Who else?
Like I said, I think looking at the 4 major grocers makes sense in this
Which
setting.
4 are price fixing?
Walmart, Albertsons,
Walmart's price
Kroger.
fixing. Wait, let me-
I didn't say they were. I said taking
You
a
just
look.
said they were. You can't come here and say and imply they're price fixing and then say they're price fixing. That's a serious allegation. You can be sued for defamation.
I said we should take a close look
Now,
at the
let
companies
me go
who
back.
are-
I want to be sure I understand your testimony. Are you telling me right here today that you're accusing Walmart of price fixing?
I'm not personally accusing Walmart of price fixing. I am suggesting
Who are
that
you accusing of price fixing? That's a serious charge.
neither my written testimony nor my oral testimony makes explicit legal claims.
So you're not accusing anybody of price fixing.
No, I have pointed out that the Department of Justice is currently looking
Who
at
are
price
you
fixing
accusing
by
of price
Agristats.
fixing? Why won't you answer my question? Who are you accusing of price fixing?
I'm pretty sure I have answered your question.
No, you
Senator.
haven't. Just tell me the names of the companies, one by one. What's the first company that you're accusing of price fixing?
I've mentioned Agristats is currently
Agra,
investigating-
what?
Agristats.
All right, who's number 2?
I said Tyson's is currently under
Tyson's
investigation for
is price fixing.
Yeah.
Who's number 3?
I've also said that I think the Department of Justice and the FTC should take a close look at
Who's
the
number 3?
major grocery
Who's number
retailers.
3? Is Walmart price fixing?
I think that they should take a look at the
Is
extent to
Walmart
which-
price fixing?
They should take a look at it.
Is Walmart price fixing?
I can't currently answer that question. I said that the Department
You won't
of
answer
Justice.
that question.
No, I
How
said
about
that
Albertsons? Is Albertsons price fixing?
the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission
Is Albertsons price fixing?
should take a close look at that.
Is Albertsons price fixing?
Again, I think the Department of Justice should take a close look.
You don't want to say.
No,
Now.
I mean, look, I'm not at the FTC. I'm not at the DOJ.
Yes,
It's not-
ma'am, but you've
it's
accused
my job
these
to
companies of breaking the law, and I think that you ought to have the courage to say in front of God and country what you believe. Now, you either do or you don't.
Look, I believe that when companies get larger and larger,
I understand
and
what
larger,
you believe,
it
but I
becomes
understand
easier and
you're waffling.
easier
You're
and
waffling
easier to
like a
coordinate.
bank catfish, okay?
It's easy to coordinate price hikes
Dr.
when you're
Antoni,
large and there are
Dr.
fewer
Antoni,
companies.
I think it's been well established that if we discovered life on Mars tomorrow, Joe Biden would send it money. To what extent has his deficit spending contributed to inflation? And do you know of any of these companies? Would you care to accuse someone of a crime here today? And if anybody else would, just let me know. If somebody is price fixing, I want to know. I'll report them myself. And I'm going to want to see your evidence. Otherwise, you subject yourself to defamation. But let me go back to my original question. What was it, Mars? Was it Mars or Jupiter? I forgot. Is the amount of money that President Biden has insisted on spending contributed to inflation? Duh. What's your answer to that?
Well, Senator, regarding the price fixing, I have no evidence because there is no evidence of that, so I can't provide that to you. But to answer the hypothetical on Mars, absolutely that would add to inflation. And yes, the deficit spending under this president, but really under any president, it doesn't matter that it's Joe Biden in particular in the White House doing it. Any person who did, if any person did what he did, it would have the exact same effect, which is this massive run-up in prices, because again, it's not that things are more valuable, it's that the dollar is worth less. So it takes more dollars to buy exactly what you used to. And if you look at, again, the Biden administration's own data, these aren't my figures, these are figures from the Biden administration. They show that prices paid by businesses and prices paid by consumers have gone up almost exactly the same, about 19% during his tenure. And so this idea that somehow the prices that consumers, that that all of the people that you represent are paying are somehow the cause of anything other than costs simply being passed on to them, the data simply don't support that.
Okay. How about you, Doc?
Excuse me. No evidence. No, I'm not accusing anyone of price fixing.
Are you a lawyer by chance?
I'm sorry?
Are you a lawyer by chance?
Oh, no, I'm not. Just an economist.
Okay. What happens if you accuse somebody of price fixing and they didn't do it?
I probably don't want to be that person.
You got good insurance?
Yeah. No, I'm not. Not doing that.
Okay. Go ahead.
As far as the fiscal stimulus stuff, that's a standard economic model. And you can go back and look. Multiple people. Olivier Blanchard is one. Some of the upper bound estimates on how big the shortfall in demand was after COVID and the shutdowns. So, like one of the largest upper bound estimates that I've seen is about $680 billion. Just the COVID package of 1.9 trillion. That's already almost 3 times the size of that. So that's.
You want to go now?
Sure.
All right.
Let the record reflect that the senator from Louisiana is far more loquacious than the Baptist preacher.
And that's a high standard.
That's
Senator
my friend.
Warnock.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. A USDA study found that grocery store consolidation has increased significantly over the last 3 decades. When grocers consolidate, farmers have fewer options to sell their goods. And as a result of this, they have less negotiating power when it comes to securing contracts. So their hands are tied. I've had many conversations with farmers all across Georgia. It's a tough business. The margins are very narrow. These kinds of things make a big difference. And so in order to cut down on their bottom line, grocers often require farmers to fulfill larger and larger contracts at lower and lower and lower prices. And so it becomes a volume business. Small and mid-sized farmers get squeezed from both sides because they can't produce the quantity required at the prices demanded by these big retailers. In short, farmers are forced to either get big or get out. Mr. Maxwell, you're a farmer. What pressures are you and your fellow farmers feeling right now because of this reality?
Senator, you described the reality of market opportunity. We would suggest that in most instances the market is dead, that the farmers become price takers. They no longer have the ability to recover the production of cost, and far too often, because of concentration, are reliant upon government subsidies in order to make a profit at the end of the year. When government increases those subsidies, like reference pricing, then those companies, like I testified earlier to, simply set a higher price to the farmer because they know the farmer is going to receive more funds They just go after it because there's no competition. So that's the reality that we're living in, squeezed from both ends and trying to wiggle in the middle just so there can be the next generation on our farm.
Yeah, we're seeing it in, and even large producers. I'm a lover of Vidalia onions down in Vidalia, Georgia, but large producers, well-known products like Vidalia onions are feeling the pressure. And this certainly starts with market consolidation. That's part of the issue, right?
Yes, Senator. We visited with some of your Vidalia onion farmers in Georgia, and they are feeling the pressure as they have to expand because there's not a market opportunity to move the onions into a market at the volume that they're currently producing. And so their choice, as you described earlier, is either to get bigger or get out, leaving many of those farmers, multi-generation farmers, burdened with the cost of the production they've had in the past and no market to move their onions
So
to.
decreased competition impact all the way down the food chain in a different sense of the word, all the way down to the consumer.
The concentration impacts the prices, input prices to farmers who are consumers, and then ultimately those prices move on into the stream, forcing the retail consumer, grocery retail consumer, to see higher prices in the grocery store. The odd thing is if you look in the middle, the folks making the most money are those concentrated processors, meat processors, the JBSs, the Tysons, the Cargills, the processors that the chair mentioned earlier this afternoon, and ultimately the consumer pays the price at the grocery store retail shelf.
Analysis, to go to a different subject or related subject, analysis from the Reinvestment Fund finds that nearly 1 million Georgians live in a community with limited access to a grocery store, 15% increase over the prior decade, and USDA has found that this greater consolidation in rural, it's greater in rural counties than in larger markets. While rural communities are responsible for producing the food that feeds our country, rural residents are often some of the most food insecure, ironically, among us. And we know that people of color in rural areas are more likely to face hunger because of a lack of food access. In 2021, Black Americans in rural communities were 2.2 times more likely to face hunger than white Americans. Dr. Owens, because of a consolidated grocery industry, many rural Americans must travel farther to get to the grocery store, often with fewer nutritious and healthy options. How would more competition in the grocery sector benefit rural communities?
Yeah, absolutely. Grocery inflation in rural areas is running above grocery inflation in other areas. So more competition and more access to more and different grocers in rural areas would absolutely help families get better deals at the grocery store.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we could say a lot more on this subject, but in the final analysis, corporate consolidation in the grocery sector is driving up prices and leaving Americans, particularly those in rural communities, with fewer options than before. Ensuring healthy options exist for all Georgians, regardless of where they live, needs to be a priority of Congress, and it's something that I continue to work on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. Thank you. These are really powerful points, and especially the part about keep those Vidalia onions coming. All right, we're counting on you. We're counting on you on this. So I just got a couple of questions. I want to follow up on where we started out. Dr. Anthony, if I understand you, I think you're saying that the reason we're seeing high grocery prices is all Joe Biden's fault because he led Congress in the direction, or at least led the Democrats in the direction of doing things like investing in infrastructure and child care and helping us get over the pandemic. Is that kind of a rough statement? You say the model tells you more money must be the reason that grocery prices are up. Is that right?
Partly, Senator, absolutely. Although I wouldn't put all the blame.
I think everybody concedes that we got a lot of different points going on. Mm-hmm. But I think I heard you say that that's the reason grocery prices are up so high. Am I wrong? Did I misunderstand you?
It's not just the spending that the president insisted upon. It's the spending that this Congress
I'm willing to put Congress in there. So it's what we have done, for example, like building roads and bridges and childcare and so on. So I just want to be clear about this. Does that mean that the CEO of Hershey's, when the Hershey's executive goes on the earnings call, that he was lying when he said that actually they were able, I think, to more than offset inflation and higher manufacturing and overhead costs. In other words, it's what I call price gouging. They didn't just pass along costs. They larded a whole lot more on top of that, and that's why Hershey's was producing great for its investors. Was he lying? Should he have just said, look, I'm just passing along what that Democratic Congress and that Democratic president did?
Senator, the comments you're referring to are not simply passing along current cost increases, but also passing along previous cost increases
No, that is not
as well.
what he says. He says that our pricing more than offset inflation and higher manufacturing and overhead costs. And I'm asking you, was he lying?
Again, Senator, this is not just price increases that are happening today, but that happened yesterday as well. This is why, if you look at figure 14 in my written testimony, you can clearly see that the prices paid by businesses like Hershey's spike before the prices paid by consumers.
He clearly states he is not passing along costs. He didn't say costs just from today or costs from last week or costs from last month. He said, I want you investors to understand Hershey's is a place to invest. And why? Because we have figured out how to increase our prices and our profits above the rate of inflation. That is what he is saying. So I'm just saying, you've told me the reason prices are high when I go to buy those candy bars is because of Joe Biden and a Democratic Congress. So is the guy lying?
Again, Senator, the Biden administration's own data is very clear
I'm
here.
not asking you about the Biden's administration. I'm asking you, is that guy lying?
Senator, frankly, you are completely mischaracterizing his statement.
Legal obligation. I am mischaracterizing the Hershey executive statement?
Yes.
Are you telling me I'm reading this wrong when he says more than offset inflation and higher manufacturing costs and overhead costs? I think the words speak for themselves. Same thing for General Mills, same thing for CEO after CEO. So let me ask you one other. You said you have no evidence of price fixing. Does that mean you're sure there's none occurring?
No, Senator, that's not what I said.
No, that's why I'm asking. You said you have no evidence of there being price fixing. Do you believe there is no price fixing going on?
I have no reason to believe there is because I've seen no evidence for
So
it.
you see nothing in any of these data that suggests that maybe those companies are colluding just a tiny little bit?
If there is any evidence for it, I
You'd
would
be
love to
shocked.
see it presented to the public.
Good. Let's talk about some evidence presented to the public. Mr. Maxwell, do you know about a recent price fixing case in Big Ag, which is part of our food chain here?
Yes, Senator, there have been multiple cases of price fixing in Big Ag.
And have they been successful?
They have been successful. There is one pending that we really are thankful that DOJ brought, and that is the one that's already been referenced, and that is AgriStats. It is an organization that was created in an effort to allow the major dominant firms in pork, poultry, and turkey to actually tacitly collude in order to set maximum price for maximum profit based upon their words. And DOJ is taking that on.
Okay. And as I understand it, we've had successful prosecutions in Big Ag of price fixing, right? And Dr. Owens, I think you were trying to talk about price fixing. Do you want to just say a bit more about that?
Sure. I think there are a number of things going on here. First, there's price fixing, which is absolutely illegal, and we do have pending cases at the Department of Justice. There's also price gouging, and the problem here is that in many cases that's perfectly legal, right? Which is why we need, your legislation, the Price Gouging Prevention Act of 2024. And there's also just plain old skimming. Juicing margins a little bit, charging a little more than you need to, passing on your rising costs, and then gilding the lily a bit. There are a lot of different features we see here, but the point is all of them are easier in concentrated markets. All of them are easier if you don't have to look over your shoulder and worry you're going to get undercut by the competition.
Okay, and that's the heart of this. It's all about concentration and competition. Thank you. Senator Reid.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Mr. Maxwell, you discussed in your testimony the egg market in 2022. Can you further explain what happened in the egg market in 2022? If producers were only raising prices to cover costs, and there was some cost inflation, why did companies like Cal-Maine, for example, report a tenfold increase in gross profits?
Thank you, Senator, and we also thank you for your leadership at that time with getting letters out and calling for investigations as consumers were facing what we believe is clearly evidence of price gouging and price fixing, as backed up by the United States Department of Agriculture when they said the market is not responding as anticipated. What happened was we have presented evidence in our written statement that clearly shows that because they had the opportunity to use cost increases and the avian flu, they seized the moment to increase prices far above what the increased inflationary cost of production was and the loss of production on laying hens. There was 7% loss of production on laying hens. So 7%. A little less because hens, for whatever reason, in 2022 laid more eggs per hen than normal. So a little less than 7. Cost went up, according to Cal-Maine, 19%. But they busted through with their margins up to 680%, tenfold margins in their gross margins. Consumers faced a 300% increase in the price of eggs in the year 2022. It was higher by the time it all unwound. What we saw was that these dominant firms clearly were working together, giving a nod to each other. They didn't have to worry about the other one coming in to compete, like a Rose Acres against Cal-Maine, because everybody was making more money than they ever had before. They had the opportunity, and they were all together going to take all they could in that opportunity, and that's what happened with the price spiking on eggs.
Well, it might not be antitrust, but in the words of Phil Arita,
Yes.
who was our professor, I think both of us, in antitrust, it's conscious parallelism, that they were looking and, they're bumping it up, I'll bump it up, and we'll all be happy. So that's something I think that we have to be aware of and prepared to respond to. Dr. Owens, one of the good news stories here is the fact that the House passed by overwhelming majority tax legislation that includes the child tax credit. It's hung up in the Senate, but we hope we can move it. And how would expanding the child tax credit help families weather higher grocery prices?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we need a two-tiered, two-track approach here. The first is we've absolutely got to get prices down. And the second is while we're working to get prices down, we got to give families some breathing room. And I think there are a few different ways to do that. One of them is expanding nutrition assistance, which the Biden administration has done. But the other is absolutely the child tax credit. That is a great option for getting more cash in families' pockets, giving them a little bit more space to absorb the rising costs of necessities like groceries. And, you know, we saw with the expanded child tax credit a couple of years back that not only did sort of poverty decline, but you know, food insecurity did as well, substantially.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Vore, you're an independent grocer, and you are vulnerable to supplier markups. Your negotiating power is not as formidable as the big chains. And how are the prices that you pay for food products changed since 2019?
Well, Senator, the prices, obviously, since the pandemic have increased for various reasons, but we're seeing this happen not just in 2019 and 2020. We're seeing it all the way up until today.
Yeah.
And for smaller operators like us, every time there's a price increase, it's not very logical for us from a consumer behavior standpoint, to constantly raise our prices because our costs have gone up. So we very rarely raise prices, even though our prices are raised way more frequently, and especially in you would think it's in some segments of the supermarket, but it's actually all throughout. It's with dairy, produce, meats, shelf-stable items. It's all across the board that we see price changes.
And is that a reflection of the situation? There's not competitors out there that are, are you sort of trapped into one or two sellers and they're keep consistently hot pricing their products higher?
I think it's a function of us being, the product from manufacturing all the way to retail, touching multiple people until it gets to us. We don't have a direct relationship with the General Mills of the world. If we're buying Pepsi or Coca-Cola, we're dealing with other small businesses who are route owners. They have their own margins. So oftentimes, even within our circle of businesses and our network, whether you're a pizzeria, whether you're a small grocer, whether you're a deli, you can buy the exact same product on the same block. You may be subject to 3 different prices. That's just the pricing schemes that a lot of these manufacturers or distributors have, and that also puts a tremendous amount of pressure on us to be conscious of the prices that we're buying things at, and that's just an additional responsibility to an already difficult segment for us. And as often people always say that small business is the backbone of this country, even though it's appreciated, we do need more resources to help us kind of support what we're trying to accomplish in each community.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reed. So I want to take a few minutes to focus on different ways that big food corporations use their size to take advantage of consumers. One is price gouging, which we've been talking about. Another is price fixing. Another is shrinkflation. Food companies quietly making the products just a little smaller but keeping the prices the same. Gatorade bottles went from 32 ounces to 28 ounces. A bag of Doritos went from 9.75 ounces to 9.25 ounces. Consumers' purchases get smaller while corporate profits get bigger. The problem has gotten so bad that France will soon require stores to put shrinkflation warning labels on products made smaller if they don't have a corresponding price cut. Now, Mr. Vora, you own and operate a neighborhood grocery store. How has shrinkflation affected your business?
It has taken I think it has hurt the credibility of small businesses as the front line of what consumers see and who they interact with. We hear from them directly, and it's a surprise for them every time they come in to shop. Usually you would think that going to a place full of food and beverages is a pleasant and enjoyable experience, but now people are, they have to have their head on a swivel, not just consumers, but also the small business, because there's often times where we're not aware of it. The package sizes change without our notice. There's no bulletin board or email or general place for us to be able to receive this information, and that creates even more of a frustrating experience for consumers.
All right, and so that's part of the problem. You see this shrinkflation. How about whether or not manufacturers, people who are supplying the Dorito chips and everything else, do they treat smaller stores like yours differently from how they treat the big stores?
Yes, Senator. I believe they do, strictly based on the pricing structure. If you look at some of the larger big box retailers and what they sell their products for, whether it's a Costco or a Sam's Club or whatever, they're paying, consumers that shop there are paying almost the same, if not sometimes less than the prices that we pay to get that exact same item at the wholesale level. There's certainly something that could be done to have a better streamlined communication with small businesses, allowing us to have direct access to the products at a more affordable rate. It's really eliminating that retail grocer, and I don't think that that's a place that we need to be. It's going to impact a lot of communities.
So concentration in the food industry is creating more concentration in the food industry. That is, this handful of manufacturers that deliver, when they price discriminate, they make it harder to create more or keep more competition in the food chain. That kind of price discrimination obviously hurts small businesses. It also hurts consumers who then end up traveling further to get their groceries because the manufacturers and distributors won't give a fair price to the local grocery stores. And who benefits? Once again, it is the biggest grocery stores and food companies, because this lets them smother competition from stores like you. This is the reason I particularly wanted to focus on this, because it's why I'm glad that the FTC is investigating potential violations of the Robinson-Patman Act, which prohibits unjustified price discrimination in these circumstances. So it looks like we've got a whole bunch of things that are helping drive up the cost of food. We've got shrinkflation, price discrimination, price fixing, and these just scratch the surface of bad corporate behavior here. We haven't even talked about the junk fees that companies like DoorDash and Uber Eats add on to deliveries, sometimes doubling or even tripling order prices without explanation. We haven't talked about surge pricing tools that fast food chains like Wendy's threaten to use as a new way to squeeze every last dollar out of Americans' wallets. Big corporations are looking for every chance to take advantage of consumers. Motive, means, and opportunity that they have at this moment in time. And all of those efforts add up to higher prices for consumers. Now, the Biden administration has been pushing back. We've heard from Mr. Maxwell talking about how suits brought against Big Ag is at least giving some hope that you may break up some of this behavior and give farmers like you an opportunity and consumers an opportunity to do better here. The FTC is working hard to block mergers so we don't see increased competition. The Biden administration has gone after junk fees. So we're getting a lot of action out of the administration. I would argue it is also time for Congress to step up. I've introduced the Price Gouging Prevention Act, which would ban grossly excessive price increases. I partnered with Senator Casey on the Shrinkflation Prevention Act, which would give the FTC and the states the tools to stop shrinkflation. So let me ask you, Dr. Owens, would passing Senator Casey's and my bills make a big difference in lowering prices for families?
Yeah, I think these are both great options. Senator Casey's bill to make sure that shrinkflation is classified as the deceptive practice, it surely is, I think would give consumers a lot of relief. Look, you shouldn't have to sort of haul your recycling with you to the grocery store to make sure you're getting the same size product that you got last week. But I think your price gouging legislation is important because it is more broad-based. And so not only can it take on excessive price hikes in the grocery sector, it can also reach further up the food chain, things like energy prices that are filtering through to food prices. And so I think, broad-based price gouging legislation, really tackling excessive prices throughout the food chain, in addition to the grocery sector, is a critical next step.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you being here today. I think it is clear that we have some major corporations in America that are pretty openly taking advantage of American consumers. And in fact, they're pretty much saying so openly on their earnings calls when they talk to their investors. I appreciate that the Biden administration is using all of the tools available to it to be able to push back and bring down grocery prices. And I think it's time for Congress to step up and do our part. With that, I thank you all for being here, and this hearing is adjourned.